All right, everybody. Well, we finally did it. We finally did it. Doc and I are sitting here. Doc, quite frankly, he begged me to be on with Jim Cornette because he is a big fan of him. Usually I do the interviews by myself, but this time I got Doc on. But I have the one and only, finally, on Booking the Territory Pro Wrestling Podcast, Jim Cornette. Jim, thank you for your time and welcome to the show.
Oh, Mike, unfortunately, I've just had something come up. I got to go. I'll see you guys later. No.
That would have been a great one.
I can't do that to you. Actually, I was going to say you've made me feel so bad with finally, because I wanted to do this forever. But, my life is always a zoo. And I try not to plan specific things for 4 or 5 days in advance because who knows what the fuck's going to happen. But finally, we've come together here. We've come together, lay our hands on the podcast and radio. And now we get to talk about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And you're nearing, and of course I'm using my memory here today. I'm armed with my memory because I didn't know which direction we're going in. I'll try to remember everything. But where are you at currently as this is going to air with the Smoky Mountain podcast in terms of reviewing the shows?
Yeah, as of this particular week, when this episode airs, we are going to be on episode 51, which is, I believe, the January 16th, 1993 episode. So we are just kicking off 1993. I think this would be the third episode from 93. You did a recap on the first one, and now we're really getting into 1993 at this point.
93 was a very good year. It was better than 92, I'll tell you that. People wonder why we did a recap like on the first week of January rather than Christmas is basically because we didn't want to tape anywhere near Christmas, but we had the Christmas chaos stuff that was more important to get on, so we kind of fudged the recap show. But we had to fill time because we weren't going to get all those guys together in a two TV tapings in the month of December and do a TV the week of Christmas chaos would have probably been not good.
Yeah, I mentioned that too, Jim. I had noticed in doing some research when we were recording those episodes that are going to be, airing coming up. But I said that it looked like, I think you actually even taped those in November. Like some of the stuff that actually happens in early January was actually taped in November of 92. Definitely a different time, right?
Well, now you've got me completely bumfuzzled and also verklempt because I should have if I'd have drugged the books out, I would have we'd have had to broadcast this on location in somewhere in a boardroom so I could spread out all my sheets and everything. But we tried to do as we got settled into our pattern, one TV taping per month. Because that's where we had to have a TV truck and the proper lighting and the production crew and et cetera to have the skeleton of the month's TVs. So we looked somewhat professional. And then we left holes, especially in the later shows in that particular taping session, for tape from the big events in Knoxville or Johnson City or Pikeville or wherever it was going to be that month. And I had to kind of know what those cards were, and I had to kind of hope that those matches happened without anybody getting hurt and in the way that I wanted them to, because sometimes we pitched to things that we couldn't talk about in front of the fans, so it had to be explained in the commentary on that. So it was a chess game trying to put all that together, but the good part about it was we could stretch into 4 and 5 weeks of TV by using the one camera shot with a live announcer talking into the microphone, footage from the arenas, and it furthered the angles and it kind of gave the people the idea they were getting to see something they weren't supposed to see. And it was cheap.
That makes sense. Hey, Doc, I'm going to ask this first question because, I will give you a little credit. You were the one who first started binging some Smoky Mountain before I did. I will admit to that. Now, I don't want you to take credit for the show now that we're finally talking to Jim, but I just want to mention that. But Jim, when you first heard about us doing the show, the Smoky Mountain specific show dedicated to your creation, when you first heard about it, what did you think? Like, what was the first thing that went through your mind? I couldn't remember if I asked you that on the Experience a few months back.
I can't remember now either. I've slept since then. But no, I got a kick of it. I think I actually, I didn't even know what you were doing at first, but I thought it might have been I saw it on Twitter. And I thought it might have been like a written column about Smoky Mountain or something. And but then when I realized what you were doing, that's when I started retweeting you, because I thought it was cool that you would not only go back and do a retrospective just of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but actually in order and show by show, so people could follow and see how it unfolded, rather than just going back and watching a bunch of stuff and telling people about the whole thing at one time. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. So, Doc, I know you want to take credit for that. So, you got any follow-ups there?
Well, I'll take credit for just about anything I can.
Doc, why does he browbeat you so badly?
Oh, Jim, you don't know.
I can't explain it myself. I do not know. But Mike likes to come on here and play heel, so I don't know. Okay. Just to reset where we are with 51. We're on episode 51. That would be the match where we crown the inaugural Beat the Champ. So that's where we are in the lineage. So we're about to put the strap on one of four young men in episode 51.
Well, you can't actually say that because there was no strap.
Exactly.
As you will recall.
Yep.
Here's the thing, and everybody's, where did you come up with this concept? Well, I just researched a few things. The Beat the Champ TV, that was the name of the TV champion in Los Angeles in the 70s. The Beat the Champ TV title holder, I think they had a trophy rather than a belt, I think. But I always just liked that, the way it looked in the programs. And I didn't want to buy another belt, and wanted to do something different where it wasn't meant for somebody to have a long reign, where I could get matches on TV that meant something between people that weren't having programs with each other. Sometimes they'd be main event matches, or sometimes it'd just be a squash match, but it would mean a little extra something if it was for some kind of TV recognition. So the idea that I came up with was, we're going to crown the initial champion by having that, as you mentioned, and then each week that guy would defend it. And each week that he defended it successfully, he'd get $1,000, which is, even for a television program in wrestling at the time, was somewhat believable, right? You could stretch that far if you didn't know if you didn't read The Observer,
right? And
it wasn't like it was ridiculous. And then if you won 5 weeks in a row, you got a bonus $5,000 from the promotion because you were a big deal. Well, basically, that was a way to, for example, Tracy, I think, was the first and maybe the only one that ever went 5 weeks in a row and retired undefeated. I believe it was.
Tracy was the first, guys, for sure.
Yeah. There you go. Whereas other guys would get a week or two, but then a top heel would come along and, boom, or whatever the fuck, and crush the kids' hopes, blah, blah, blah. But it was just something different, and it didn't really play into the arenas at all, but it didn't need to. But that was the whole story behind it. And it was something different to have a guy, okay, boom, you've won this, you get your money. Now each week you get some more money, but you have to quit after 5. And that way it was always turning over.
Yeah, I've actually said that. I like that. One of the initial things I thought when we got to that point, and Doc and I and Harper and I on the show talked about this, was just what you said. Each week you had a meaningful match that meant something. Sometimes it was a squash match, like you said, and other times it wasn't. Could have been a main event, but each week you had something. One of the things, too, I wanted to ask you this. Since Tracy was the first one, I've noticed as he came in and he was the first Beat the Champ, it put together a string of wins for him that gave him some incredible momentum as ending off 92 and going into 93. I'm assuming that was your goal there. I'm gonna build him up. I mean, he's already yeah.
Well, see, the thing is, our first top babyface was Brian Lee, obviously, kind of by necessity because he's big and looked good, and I could get him. And Brad Armstrong was still under contract. And I'm not disrespecting Brian because he was still green at the time. He became a much better heel. He was not the top babyface at that particular point in time in his life or our lives. But you got to start somewhere. And so basically I figured that instead of using the first 6 or 9 months or whatever the fuck to build my top babyface to be Superman, Brian's only going to go so far it can get Dirty White Boy over. In other words, I wanted to have a babyface be the first champion anyway, but that way, when I put it on Brian, he was in a mix with Paul Orndorff, so he was going to learn something. And he's in the ring with Dirty White Boy, so he's going to learn something. But then I knew that Paul was a guest star, whereas White Boy was going to be around. So I was building to put it on White Boy. And then finally, when I did put it on White Boy, and he had the program with Horner, bells and whistles, I was building, trying to once again keep heat on Dirty White Boy, because by that point I knew, or thereabouts, that I was going to be able to get Tracy. And now I've got a top babyface that I'm put everything behind because he can get over. So that's, as soon as he came in, it was all to Tracy Smothers is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he's not going to fucking lose, and he's going to get in a deal with White Boy. And my God, the chain matches and the stuff with Ron and everything is going to be just splendiferous.
Hey, Doc, do you want to tell Jim what you said when Tracy came in that first time? And because we're a little hard on Tim Horner, as you could imagine, Jim, on the show. But the first thing that you said when Tracy's out there, he cuts his promo, he has his first match. What did you say that Tim Horner said in the back, theoretically, in your mind?
Something like, God damn it, I just slid down he just kicks the trash can and shit. It's like, because the point is, when you see Tracy Smothers,
he just moved down the ladder without doing anything, right?
Tracy Smothers is everything Tim Horner seems to want to be, but just can't do it or have the charisma. And as our third guy in the booth, Harper, says, Tracy Smothers is these people's Hulk Hogan. He's everything to them.
And the thing is, there was the humble but could be fiery Southern babyface with the guts that never backs down and people love, which is what Horner wanted to be. But as I told Horner one time, and I've mentioned this before, if it was a movie, he'd be the best friend. He was basically that way, and his job he suddenly became Tito Santana to fucking Tracy's Hulk Hogan. Everybody that Tracy got was going to beat the fuck out of Tim to get there, probably at that point.
Or as Harper says, Doc, when we're on, Harper says that the rest of us are on Windows 10, and it seems like Tim Horner's still on Windows 95 when it comes to.
Yeah, I don't think he would be the best friend on the Booking the Territory show. He would be the whipping boy. And we have some questions about Tim later in the show, but we wanted to get you good and lathered up first here.
Well, yes. There you go. Get me good and liquored up. Oh, lathered. I see where you're going.
Hey, Jim, I have a question. I was talking to Bobby Fulton a few months back, and this is kind of common, but Bobby said or common knowledge. A lot of people have talked about this. Bobby said that the first few Smoky Mountain tapings were actually shows of his, and JYD was on them. Now, Bobby claimed that Rick Rubin didn't want JYD on Smoky Mountain TV, which is common knowledge at this point. I'm curious, Jim. I know JYD had issues. I grew up on Mid-South. I'm very well versed in JYD's career, Mid-South and beyond. I don't know the story of why.
Let me explain, my son.
Okay.
Here's the deal. It's not that Rick Rubin specifically said that he didn't want. Here's what happened. When we were discussing how to best shoot pilot episodes of Smoky Mountain Wrestling to take to the TV stations to say, hey, we actually are going to we're not just, bullshitting you. We've done these pilots. We're going to have a TV show. We want on your air. I found out that Bobby was running, because he asked me and Stan to be on the show, was running the Greenville Memorial Auditorium in Greenville, South Carolina. He had found a sponsor that lined him up with a couple or three, decent sized arenas. And he was booking guys that he had booked Orndorff. That's when I found out Paul was taking bookings, and he was reasonable. I'll tell you, after 20 something years, you get Paul for $500. And JYD was $500 also. That level of star, ex WWF or WCW or whatever, that was the pay structure in the early 90s on independent shows a lot of time.
Right.
But anyway, so I said, Bobby, I will bring in even more talent since you're in a real arena and it would look great, can we shoot our pilots there? We can have the matches that you booked for your main events as dark matches, but I'll bring in a bunch more talent and lights, and we'll dress it up and make it look nice, and hopefully that'll attract even more people. And I don't want any of the gate. Just let us do this, right? So that and it didn't. Let's put it this way: it didn't set records in Greenville for attendance, but it looked good. It looked like we were somebody on television. But in Bobby telling me what his card was, I'd had a couple of talks on the phone with Ruben where we were bemoaning the bullshit kind of, homogenized, whether it be New York style or just at that point, Dog had just had a run where they only brought him back, and just Ruben wanted to stay away from guys that were past their prime or weren't producing in the ring or cartoon fun stuff like the WWF. And on two different occasions, he had brought up the name, the Junkyard Dog.
So he specifically said Dog at that point. Okay.
But this was, we were not talking about using Dog. He just abstract out of the air. But I told Bobby, I said, I can't fucking spend this guy's money and shoot him 2 fucking television pilots and have one of the people he specifically bemoaned as being the fat, lazy wrestlers that don't fucking hit hard anymore. I said, I can't have him on the fucking show. I like Dog, but at the time, honestly, he wasn't in shape and he wasn't motivated, and everybody knows that. But, Ruben was looking more for the kind of Southern hit hard, fucking move fast, high spots, fire and brimstone promo, real emotion, animosity, instead of another rule I just made, and it actually ticked off. Of course, he's got over it in the intervening 25 years, but Danny Davis, no face paint. Because there was Ultimate Warrior, and there was fucking goddamn whoever was in WCW at the time. It was some Wild Jungle Savage, or this, just everybody's painting their face up like goddamn Barnum and Bailey. So I said,
Right.
Nobody's gonna have any face paint. And then at that time, Danny was doing the Nightmare thing, but they dropped the mask and he painted his face to the stars and everything. And it got over in Continental and in that area. But I just said, I made a rule. I don't want to do that. So anyway, but that was, that was nothing personal against JYD, but I couldn't produce these pilots and send them back to California and have the guy on that he had specifically talked about. So, that's, and I never knew that I didn't know I was going to have to turn down Jay White. He was in a dark match that night. We just didn't shoot it.
Right. That's what. That's what Bobby was saying. I just didn't know the reasoning. I found it funny because I remember Bobby telling me, he goes, he specifically said no to JYD, and I had no. I knew JYD had some problem. I don't say problems, but obviously he was getting out of shape and
it wasn't even anything as far as we were worried about it professionalism or whether he was going to show up or anything like that. And honestly, when Dog walked in, he saw because we flew a truss of lights, so it looked real good, and and all this stuff. Dog said, "You guys are serious, didn't you?"
Yeah, Doc, you and I talked about that, how the first couple of shows, I mean, not just the first couple, but that's the one thing that you notice when you turn on episode 1. You may not be into the storylines yet, but from the start, Doc, didn't we talk about how we were like, this looks really good even in non-HD in 2016 and 17 when we first started?
Definitely, and actually in the first couple of shows, we actually did the demographics of the arena and noticed how big the arena was, that it was shot in.
Yeah, well, the Greenville Memorial Auditorium, it was a Crockett stop every Monday night for fucking years, decades. And in 1986, that town had grossed over $600,000 for live wrestling events. Like at that point, probably about 30 or 32 of them by 86. They didn't go every Monday night, but we'd sold it out. Bash shows, done 70 grand in that building.
Wow.
And Christmas afternoons, they would do fan appreciation on the way to the Omni or whatever. All seats $3, and they do $18,000 house at $3 tickets. It was an amazing town, but of course they were all amazing towns about 5 years before we started running.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. 5 years. Well, hey Doc, you and I have talked about this a number of times, and I don't even have this written down, but as Jim just said that, I got to ask it. So Doc and I have gone back and forth, and not that we disagree, but one of the things that we think hurt Smoky Mountain as great as it was when the promotion was started, just based on what was going on in the wrestling business as a whole. It's in a down period, and we wonder often and speculate amongst ourselves, if you start what did you say, Doc? A year or two later? What was the line that you said? If Jim starts later, is he more successful? I don't remember the year that you mentioned though.
I don't know. It seems to me if you go 18 months to 24 months later and you're into 96 and 97, when everybody's wearing NWO shirts and the Monday Night Wars start, does that trickle down?
Well, actually, yeah, that's a very good point. I've always had impeccable timing. When we started, I didn't think it could hardly get any worse because, I mean, a lot of our shows in Knoxville outdrew shows that WCW was running in the Omni and in other major arenas. I remember one time, I think we outdrew Kemper Arena in Kansas City, but it just with every national TV talent that they had. But it did get worse. And I don't know if we'd have started at a different time. If we'd have started 2 years later, whether it'd been great. I think if we'd have probably existed 2 years later, that's when all of a sudden, even just because of the wrestling explosion, outlaw shows that had nobody on them started drawing houses and places. And more importantly, TV stations, instead of wanting to get paid to be basically hold their nose and run wrestling, all of a sudden we're looking for wrestling TV shows to put on. That would have been the biggest point. Because if we could have gotten the markets to exploit with the big shows like we had in Knoxville and we had in the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, and Eastern Kentucky for that extent. I mean, who else was drawing, fucking 2,000 people up in Eastern Kentucky hills at that point? Our shows in Pikeville, the Bluegrass Brawls outdrew WCW in the Omni in Atlanta. But we couldn't get the other markets. If we got Greenville, Asheville, Spartanburg, or if we could have gotten Charleston, West Virginia, and been able to do the same thing, draw on a regular basis for live wrestling at that point. And I mean, Knoxville weekly through the 70s and Southeastern probably sold 150,000 tickets a year. I think if we'd have ran weekly in Knoxville at the Coliseum through our years, we would have probably had about 600 or 700 people a week, because the same people that came once a month to the worst shows would have come no matter how often we were there. Right?
Yeah.
You couldn't make money with that. But the 3 or 4 times a year in each market, we could do a kind of a blowout show, which whether it be Thanksgiving and Christmas and Sunday Bloody Sunday and Night of Legends in Knoxville, or whether it be once again Thanksgiving and Christmas, but then potentially a big show in March and the Fire on the Mountain show in August in Johnson City, Bluegrass Brawl every April. If we'd have had a few more TV markets and buildings where we could have popped those shows, I mean, the finances of wrestling then versus now are so ridiculous. If we'd have come up with an extra $20,000 a month, so $5,000, about what they spend on fucking delivery pizzas for the crew at Raw after the tapings, we would have been farting through silk, as Nick would have said. So but at the same time, you were going to find that. But I mean, we could go into Knoxville and just die in a Coliseum and only lose $3,000 because Sandy Scott was getting the Coliseum rent and staffing and Ticketmaster, police, EMT guy, the guy that ran the spotlight, the whole thing for like $2,700 or $2,800 or $3,000 or whatever, depending on the attendance. So it wasn't a massive money loser, but we could go in with a Night of Legends and make $20,000 in one night, or choose to have a TV truck there to shoot it for the video and make, 14 or 15 or whatever. Those mega shows could have worked in the way we were laid out, could have worked in each of the markets, and each market would have had its own special big show. But you couldn't get on fucking TV. So that was basically long-winded answer to your question. I'm sure we would have drawn better at the gate when wrestling got hot 2 years later, but the biggest thing would have been easier to get on fucking television. And if we'd had that, we could have done it by ourselves.
Yeah, you're right. That TV part of it that's a big deal. Obviously speaking, I mean, man, we've speculated that. We're like, if we took Knoxville
from scratch, where there was no full-time local promotion or TV show, and hadn't been in 2-3 years at that point. And started out in TV in February of 92 and house shows in May of 92. And you'll recall it was really by August of 93 is when we did the first big house with me and Bob in the lumberjack match, but we did almost 3,000 people and almost $20,000. Wow. By the time that the Sunday Bloody Sunday rolled around 6 months later, we did 40-something hundred people and $33,000. And then we did the Night of Legends we established, and we did 40-something hundred people and $39,000, I believe. And the next year in August, it was 40-something hundred people and $37,000-something. But the point is, there was growth despite the bad wrestling environment.
Right.
And there was growth in Johnson City, too. We started stronger in Johnson City than we did in Knoxville. I think our first show in Knoxville, about 900 people. Our first show in Johnson City was over 1,500. And we didn't hit the highs of the mega cards or the mega crowds like we did in Knoxville, but it was a smaller market. But still, you know, when you can get a couple thousand people in Freedom Hall, you know, and you're running it once a month for the big show, you're doing fairly well. Mm-hmm. But imagine what we could have done with Asheville, North Carolina, or Greenville, South Carolina, or Charleston, West Virginia. I always thought would have been a great market.
Yeah.
And, you know, and trying to Chattanooga, I think we could have done well also, but the only Chattanooga TV we could ever get was 1 o'clock in the morning. So, but if we'd followed that pattern in those other towns where you can draw, you know, for your periodic big shows, which I looked at like my Bill Watts Superdome events, or Dusty Rhodes's Starcade or themed shows or whatever. You know, if you could get 1,500, 2,000 people or more in a building that you ran once a month, 3 or 4 times a year, you had a pretty good fucking promotion going on, but you needed about 6 of those.
Yeah. Well, it still was a great promotion, as you know. That's why we go through it weekly.
Well, I guess I just fucking brought that down to the screeching halt.
No, we got
people cutting their wrists now. Ask me something fun.
Well, all right, I
go ahead. Yeah, Doc, I know you got a bunch, so go ahead.
Throughout the first year, going through the show by show, not only have we enjoyed the announce team of Dutch and Bob Caudle, but our fans have really bought into that as well and realized the chemistry that Dutch and Bob had. We know Dutch leaves to go down and book in Puerto Rico. Why did Bob Caudle end up leaving?
At that point, and let me start by saying the reason why I loved Bob and Dutch. If you notice on the pilots, I did it with Bob one time and Dutch did it the other time. And that's because simply we both had exposure on WCW television as color guys. And I wanted to make the pilots different and just show that we had different personalities available and etc. But I always wanted to be Dutch because I was already managing. I was already, you know, fucking screaming at the monitor backstage, at the truck, and the guy with the little gimmick in his ear. Last thing I wanted was to be tied down to the desk. So I was never going to be the commentator, and Dutch was just fucking great. So they, you know, obviously I wasn't going to make any changes until finally Dutch got the book in Puerto Rico and had to go. And then you guys helped me. When Dutch left, who sat in with Bob?
That would have been Les.
Yeah,
that's right, Les. Because when we first started, Les had some type of job or employment that he had in Cincinnati at the time that prevented him from coming down there on like Mondays and shit, right? Which is, we always did our TV tapings on Mondays. And it'd be quite a haul for him, and he'd have to, you know, miss a lot of Tuesday also. So anyway, he was doing the special videos that we'd shoot at our big events in Knoxville, Johnson City or whatever that was on weekends. So Les started sitting in, and Les and Bob were good. There wasn't really the counterpoint of a color guy. But, you know, they were two pros, and they both had identity in my kind of hybrid area because Bob Caudle had been Mid-Atlantic guy for years, and we with WCYB, they'd been seeing Crockett TV in the Tri-Cities for years, and they broadcast in North Carolina, but Les Thatcher was the Knoxville guy, so for that end, he was a legend. And that worked perfectly, but then something very important happened. I believe that was at the point that JR became available, right? When Bob left.
Yes.
Because for whatever reason, they decided to fire JR, and we still were talking on the phone, and he didn't even say anything like I'm available. I was just getting the scoop from him on what the fuck happened with his actual real job. And to be honest, here now it's been over 2 years, and Bob Caudle, who is he 88 or 89 now, or is he 90 by now? The point is, this is a man in his late 60s. He was only 20. It was 20-something years ago, but he was still right. He lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is way the fuck over in the middle of North Carolina, and he was making some hellacious trips, especially when we started taping more and more toward the Tennessee side and the Eastern Kentucky side than the Carolina side. And he was coming in a lot of times with fucking his shirt unbuttoned, and poor Bob, and he's the nicest man in the world, but his hair disheveled and his bags thrown over his shoulder, and he's huffing and puffing because he's walked up a hill from the cow pasture that he had to park in this fucking lonely high school gym in Hayside, Virginia or whatever. So he was not really going to complain because he was a wonderful man and he liked it, but at the same time, the trips were getting hard on him. And I asked JR, I said, JR, do you want to do something? And he said yes. And at the time also, Dennis Brent, who was friends of JR's friend of mine from way back, and later worked in the WWF office, etc., was doing the hotline stuff. And we got our own Smoky Mountain hotline, and Dennis was helping facilitate that, and JR was doing a thing for it. So instead of me paying Bob Caudle, bless him, just for his night's work to drive to hell and back in these mountains, most time by himself, or if he drug his poor wife with him, and every once in a while he'd ride with Ron Wright, because Ron Wright lived over there for a while. But JR had a chance not only to get paid that night, but he had a piece of the 900 number, and we were trying to do some other things. So we made and then all of a sudden we had Jim Ross calling Smoky Mountain Wrestling Television, the voice of not only WCW at much of its heyday, but then also fresh off WWF TV. So that was, and the best in the business. So that was kind of a no-brainer for everybody all the way around.
That makes sense. Doc, you wanna go the New Jack route now, or what?
Sure.
We are fascinated with when New Jack comes in. Now, we haven't gotten anywhere near that, obviously, at this point, because we're only at the beginning of '93. But Doc and I have definitely watched.
But still, you got to take advantage of this while you can. We'll hop all over the place.
Well,
right.
New Jack seems focused, a lot more focused than what we would see up north. In just a couple of years, he is a force of nature.
Yeah,
it is tense when he delivers a promo on television. He looks like he's going to jump out through the TV and start dating all the white women. and it's just it is a fantastic performance. So, we've heard stories from Tracy Smothers. We've heard stories from Bobby Blaze. We've heard stories about how real it was in some of these communities when New Jack and the Gangstas came in. So here's my question. As a guy, we love heat and lots of it.
Yes.
Did you ever consider putting Sonny with New Jack, and what would have happened if you'd have done that?
No, I didn't, and it actually, there's no way in the world that would have worked. Actually, I tried to originally book Tony Atlas. I would put Sonny with Tony Atlas, because but Tony found out about it, or Tony's wife found out about it, and he had a dalliance before in WCW, so she wouldn't let. He sent me my plane ticket back, the TV, the day he was supposed to start. But no, not with New Jack, because, and see, that's the thing, and to be honest, and I blame Paul. by the time that New Jack got to ECW, and all of a sudden there's no restrictions, and he can outdo everybody, wants to outdo everybody, will outdo everybody, wants to be more dangerous, more fucked up, more psychotic, probably in and out of the ring than everybody else that was there. I think it went too far, and Jack probably damaged himself physically doing all that shit, and I'm sure he exacerbated any bad habits he might have had. But the reason why I thought it would work in Knoxville, and it did to some extent in the big towns, but the spot shows, as I'll tell you in a minute, not so much. He just was an incredible fucking performer, as verbally, and as you said, with the intensity and the look. Yeah. They couldn't work worse shit. Him or Mustafa, neither one. Mustafa looked great and never say anything, but looked like the big jacked up muscle-headed, nut. But New Jack was as good a promo in whatever. There was no New Jack genre. He would have been Jerry Lawler in the Jerry Lawler genre. He would have been the equivalent promo in the New Jack genre. He would, whatever the fuck he was the best, and you believed it. And I wanted that. I saw him working for Sammy Kent in Georgia when we did those Marietta shows. And the New Jack Syndicate, and he'd come out with a couple of stooges and do his thing, and the matches were the shits. But I knew we'd get people to fucking work with him, but nobody could talk like that. And with Rodney King and L.A. and fucking OJ and all that other stuff, I said, well, we might as well try it, because how the fuck you supposed to get any heat anymore? And I was losing the bodies, right, to the WWE. Mm-hmm. So... And then that's why I finally put D'Lo Brown with him, because at least one guy on the team could work and was sane. Well, and Mustafa was sane. He's a nice guy. But just one guy on the team could work, and he could drop the fall and everything. But when they first brought the posses, and they were just friends of New Jack's, and they'd ride up in that fucking Corvette he had and come out with their hands in the goddamn paper bags and the fucking bandanas over their faces. And just anything that I could do to make it more legitimate. And that's why everybody said, well, how could you book him to say those things? You didn't book people to say shit back in those days. You booked people that said shit. I told New Jack, I said, go out and piss the white people off and get over as a fucking heel. I can't tell New Jack. What was I going to come up with the line, you silenced Medgar Evers, you silenced Malcolm X, and now I'm next. And when he said the NAACP can kiss my black ass, I did not tell him to say, but I loved it. But he was, God, it was, the promos were, so the point is, in the big towns, they got some heat. And when I could, put it against the rock and roll in Knoxville and Christmas or whatever, and especially when the bodies came back, we had a couple of nice houses in Knoxville with them and us as baby faces against them. And Johnson City, a couple of good ones. And of course, we had The Undertaker in Pikeville, I guess, so that was going to sell out regardless. But the spot shows, it didn't fly in the right way, because that's how we lost Paintsville. My friend Ken Cantrell was on the volunteer fire department. He's the biggest wrestling fan in the world, tape collector, et cetera, for years. He still is involved in wrestling, promotes over in Eastern Kentucky. Bluegrass Championship Wrestling folks. They were our sponsors, and we would draw, 5, 6, 7, 800 people when we were outside at the Apple Festival with the Big Apple Grapple. In Paintsville, Kentucky, this little town, like 4 times a year. But when the volunteer fire department had to be security to walk the gangsters back and forth to the ring, and all of their friends and neighbors called them up and asked them why they were bodyguarding them Negroes, shall we say, all of a sudden they didn't want to have wrestling anymore. So the small towns, they didn't get the heat like we want to come see you get the fuck beat out of you. They got the heat like we don't want to be in the building. And then also, to be honest, every time New Jack would stir him up too much, he'd have some kind of heart palpitations, call an EMT. They'd be putting the cuff on him, and in all the chaos and everything, somehow he'd hop in the car and slide out. But that was the thing. He was an incredible performer, but I think he jumped the shark by just being so nuts and having to be so nuts to be New Jack that nobody would touch him, because Vince wasn't ever going to fucking touch that. And when I tried to get them booked, they'd been there for a year and I had nothing else, right? we got to change shit up, and I'm losing my spot shows. So I call Randy Hales. He's like, fuck, I ain't going to take that shit in Memphis. And of course, New York was not interested. So that's when I actually had called Paul and said, hey, I got these guys. They're perfect for you. I didn't know he was engineering to get them away from me behind my back and 2 weeks before their scheduled finish date, which was what led to much of the unpleasantness, as the British used to call World War II.
Wow. Yeah, New Jack was intense. We've been talking about some of the promos lately on the Thursday show, the Booking the Territory flagship show that we do, and where we kind of talk about a bunch of things, including the NWA, but we've talked about advanced things there on Smoky Mountain, and New Jack's first promo where he says, good job, OJ, that's two less we have to worry about. You just like, Jim,
we popped the Chiron up, and the views of the gangsters are not necessarily those of Smoky Mountain Wrestling or this station.
Yeah. I mean, Jim, I'm 41 years old. Doc's a little older than me, not much, and that's probably one of the most intense promos I've seen in any form of wrestling anywhere. When he says that, I mean, it's just insane. But if we'd have had local TV let me say this two different ways now. If we'd have had broadcast television in a big market and with a guy like that, like in Chicago or Los Angeles or New York, one thing would have we'd either sold out major arenas or gotten kicked off television before we had the chance to run the shows. Well, one or the other. Speaking of that, so I know we got a couple of more questions before we ask you some Tim Horner stuff, but there is a Tim Horner shoot interview making the waves on the YouTubes, as you like to call it, on the Experience these days, and Tim Horner claims that right after you got the gangsters in this video, he clearly says it, Coca-Cola offered you $100,000 to tone the show down. As in Horner claims, Sandy Scott told him this. Any truth or thoughts on what Horner's claiming there? He claims he got that from Sandy Scott.
Well, yeah. Here's the deal. Fucking Horner was mortified. We had the forces at work were anytime that we try to do anything edgy, Horner would be mortified because he was a church going fellow and et cetera, et cetera. And anytime we didn't do anything edgy, we'd be accused by the fans of today of being, well, that fucking bullshit Southern wrestling, right? So damned if you do and damned if you don't. But I saw a clip that somebody sent out of that interview, and he's like Russo in that he genuinely remembers shit this way because he's told himself that for so long. As far as Coca-Cola, and it wasn't Sandy that said that. I'm sure Sandy probably thought, oh, these gangsters, but what the fuck at this point? We got to do something. And Ruben loved it, by the way, and he's paying for it.
Right.
And of course, he's out in L.A. He lives fucking 6 blocks from the fucking riot, and he loved that shit, right?
Right.
But Coca-Cola, or I believe it was Mellow Yellow. Anyway, in Knoxville, Continental Wrestling had gotten a deal from a local Coca-Cola distributor back in the late 80s. And I think they were pushing Mellow Yellow. But they had the apron skirts and they had the fucking canvas and everything. And they had a tournament named it whatever the fuck. But they got a significant amount of money. I can't remember how much it was. But that was in the 80s when the television went to a variety of places and the promotion was running on a weekly basis and everything was cooking, right?
Yeah.
So the thought was always, can't we get the deal like they got because we're here now and we've got a TV show and we've got a promotion and blah, blah, blah. Since the start of the goddamn deal, it wasn't like we just found this out with 2 years in. And that was part of Horner's fucking sales pitch for Pam Lawson. Oh, let's hire her. She sells advertising on, the Morristown radio station. So naturally she'll be tied in with the bigwigs. But she can go after Coca-Cola or the Grand Hotel down in Pigeon Forge or some fucking source of money, right?
Right.
Okay. Do it. Let me know when Coca-Cola wants to hand us a fucking check, right? That day never came. Horner overlooks he's dangling his participles because what he said to me one time was, well, fuck, if we're doing that stuff, I don't know if Coca-Cola is ever going to give us it. I said, congratulations to match the money they haven't given us for the past 2 years. We're supposed to modify our fucking program for fictitious money that nobody wanted to give us before we were doing what we're doing now. So fuck it. We need to do whatever the fuck we can do. That was it. It wasn't like I'm not going to change for this check for. I would have had the entire crew wrestle with Coke bottles around their neck for $100,000. Idiot! It's fucking buffucking Mike, there was never any legitimate offer of $100,000 or any other money. It was his smoking the hopium and his fucking hillbilly chicken fucking brain that this might happen because it happened to a fucking other promotion in the same place 7 years beforehand. And I waited long enough for fucking Coca-Cola to open their arms and embrace us. You fucking moron. He said that he came in my house one time. I did have a office in the basement, right? And occasionally they would come over, him and Sandy, when Sandy was in town, and we'd all get together and sit down and talk or whatever the fuck. He said that I had fucking $10,000 or whatever in fucking cash sitting on the table. He said, why don't you put that in the bank? I said, I like having it around. What kind of fucking LSD was he on?
I remember him saying,
we couldn't get the goddamn money in the bank fast enough halftime to on Monday morning to cover the fucking checks from the guys running to get the checks cashed. I wasn't keeping 10 grand around because I fucking was happy about it. A couple of times I used my own money in cash angles, and I don't know that I would have left it laying around if Horner was in my house. So he's a complete fucking lunatic.
Doc, you were trying to say something. Jim, we're right there with you.
I got another one for you. And he said, well, I saw the books. I saw the books. I know where the money was. Well, congratulations, motherfucker. I've still got the books. I still got them all. I got everything. I got all the check stubs. I got all the show report for every show we ever fucking did. The complete accounting of every penny we took in and every penny we spent for the whole 4 years we were in business. You dumb fuck. And if there was anything wrong with it, somebody besides Tim Horner would have gotten mad at me up until now.
Oh, boy.
Jesus Christ. He's like fucking Trump. He has to inflate people's perception of him by that he has something to do with things or some ownership or some management. That's why the baby faces were always calling me on the phone and bitching and complaining when he'd get mad because everybody was selling more gimmicks than him. And he'd say, well, the office is going to take that gimmick money. And then old babyface would call me, what the fuck? And I said, no, just don't listen to him. He's a fucking idiot.
The irony of what you just said is I literally just talked to Bobby Blaze and Tracy Smothers in the last 3 to 4 weeks, and they were talking about that with us on the show. That exact thing that you just said. And Tracy was like, fuck you, I just paid for this. What are you talking about?
Yeah, he was so frustrated because he couldn't tell people what to do. That was his fucking goal, which I found out too late in being involved in the promotion, was not to fucking draw houses and be a success, but to be in a position where he could tell people what to fucking do. And it pissed him off that he never was.
Doc, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I was just going to say, Mike, you notice how Tim Horner has the same effect on everybody we know? Jim is starting to get worked up just like we do every week when we talk about that motherfucker.
Oh, it's just, if you're going to fucking tell people bullshit, at least make it fucking credible bullshit. It's not immediately fucking debukable. or just, my God, but he wouldn't he wouldn't be that chicken fucker that we know and love, old Horner, if he didn't come up with shit like this from time to time. What else was in there? What else did he say because I know it was entertaining.
Oh, if we're gonna go there, I got a few things, and let me list them. Let me list 2 of them out. That way you can respond, or 3 of them out, and then you can respond to all 3. One of the ones,
okay.
And I think our mutual friend Brian Lass actually told me about one of these recently. But he claimed that Rick Rubin wanted a pair of Ric Flair's boots, and once you got Rubin a pair of Flair's signed boots, Rick Rubin was ready to put money in a Smoky Mountain. He also claimed.
Wait a minute now! Don't let's not bury the leads here. Let's go ahead and address that as it happened. No, once again, the dumb fuck. Yeah, Rick Rubin. When I met Rubin, My friend Cat Collins, who had been a radio DJ for some years, started working for Rick's record company, going out with the acts like the Black Crowes and guys, and we had hung out. And when Ruben came to Atlanta, he wanted to meet two people at the WCW show, me and Ric Flair. And as Walter Brennan used to say in the Guns of Will Sonnet, that's no brag, just fact. So that's why we had been talking. And when we finally put the deal together and decided to go ahead with it as a thank you for him, because this is a goddamn one of the genius record producers of our fucking time. And he was goddamn getting fucking 6-figure royalty checks from CBS Records in a dorm room at NYU. I don't think he would bandy about his fucking fortunes on the whim of getting a pair of boots. We got him a pair to say thank you, Rick, for engaging in this with us. And here's a pair of Ric Flair's boots as a thank you present. Because Horner was always he was sniffing around like a dog trying to find his fucking treats in his owner's pocket, wanted to be involved in everything. And so he was always, so he found out I was sending him boots, and that's how he got that story, but he got it fucking flummoxed.
Well,
that's why he begged his own goddamn fax machine, because when me and Sandy Scott got fax machines, he felt left out, Sandy told me, because he didn't get a fax machine. I said, what the fuck does he need a $400 fax machine for? Well, he just feels like we got him. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, one time, he sniffed himself into a goddamn trip to California to meet with Ruben. That's the one time he went out there. Sandy and I were going, and Tim said, well, I know money's tight, but I'll get my own ticket and go. We're like, oh, jeez. I told Ruben, yeah, well, Horner's coming with us. All right. And that's, oh, God, that's the fucking most fish out of water thing I've ever seen in my life. But here's Tim fucking Horner from Morristown, White Lightning, sitting in Rick Rubin's living room off the fucking strip in Hollywood with a giant stuffed fucking great black bear and in his entryway, and this giant massive CD collection and all of his other decorating Ruben had, and Horner sitting there just, anyway.
So, thanks for that clarification, Jim. So, also, Horner claims that he's the one that gave Jimmy Golden the idea of using the drop kick as a finisher.
Oh, for fuck's sake! What?
He said, Jim, I am giving you the notes. Doc and I and Harper and I actually did about a 40-minute segment on our show a couple months back on this interview, and we were just in awe at the utter just craziness of some of the stuff he claimed. But that was one of the things he claimed.
I've told that story before, but
I know.
Jimmy Golden gave Jimmy Golden the fucking drop kick to use for a finish. I said, Jimmy, what do you use for a finish? He said, well, I throw a pretty good drop kick. I said, all right, because I'm going to think, well, you know. And he knocked a fucking guy's head off. His kids were born dizzy. I said, all right, here's your finish. That simple. How the fuck did Horner figure it? Horner was not the one that got kicked.
He tells that same story, except instead of Jim Cornette, it's Tim Horner did the same thing you just said.
Yeah, he replaced your name with himself.
That's it. What do you use for a finisher? Well, I throw a pretty good drop kick. Same thing.
They literally word for word on the interview.
You know, he may very well have been sitting right there when we said those things. You know, but he would not have been approving Jimmy Golden's finish on his debut on Smoky Mountain Television. That would have been moi.
Exactly.
Fuck's sake.
Horner also went on to claim, Jim, that, and you've told this story, but we found it kind of fascinating because you obviously, you know, this didn't happen, but he claims that Smoky Mountain ripped off numerous printing companies in Morristown, Tennessee. And before you answer, Doc and I have said, one, we know that's not true, but two, how many goddamn printing companies could there be in Morristown, Tennessee to just keep running to if his ridiculous claims were true? He's so crazy, dude.
And there was one printing company early on that we owed several $100s to for whatever the fucking reason. I can't remember what it was, but we would move because we would find people to do them cheaper.
Right.
But over a period of time, I think we used 4 different ones. The big ones that we started out was a company in Morristown. And this would, I would have to go back through my notes if I even remembered. there was whatever amount of money it was, we found some place that would do it cheaper. And I think we owed him some money for a while. I also think we paid him off.
He claims $4,000.
Oh, Jesus Christ. $4,000. Okay, a set of posters and flyers for a fucking spot show is $150.
Exactly.
And we would run 3 spot shows a week max. So how long would it take to fucking anyway. And then Ronnie West had a printing company down in Cleveland. When Ronnie West in 95 started running some spot shows for us, he had a printing company down there. And also at one point in time, I think Bill Needham in Knoxville did some posters for us. But I think there was like over a period of 4 years, there was about 4 different people. But yes, I remember we owed one of them some money, and I think they were crabby, and I think we found another place that would do it cheaper. I don't recall that we fucking stiffed them. Unless of course they were well. And here's the thing: Horner ended up buying the when Horner was in charge of merchandise, he ended up buying the screen printing place that he was getting our shirts printed at.
Well, he also says he also says he kicked you out of there one time before he physically assaulted you.
He sure did. He said that.
I was only in the place one time. And he didn't kick me out because that's before I fucking fired him. And I never spoke to him again after I fired him, and I never went to his place when I fucking fired him.
Yeah, he's a piece of work.
I did the Bischoff. I fired him on the phone. I wish he'd turned into Steve Austin. It'd make a better story.
One of the last things he went on to claim, Jim, was the interviewer asked Horner about the Smoky Mountain Library that obviously is owned by the WWE now. And the interviewer asked Horner why Horner would not have a claim to that asset if he indeed was a part of the ownership. Horner said, "That's a good question. Ruben should have a say in it." This is on the internet. I'm not making this up, folks. Doc and I have dissected this, pretty well.
If Horner at any point in his life or in Smoky Mountain's life owned on paper as much of Smoky Mountain Wrestling as I currently own of the rights to The Walking Dead. Hope that clears up that fucking question.
There you go. Yeah.
Or had any money invested in same, whether he had any goddamn ownership or not. There was never one penny at Tim. There was a lot of my money put in Tim Horner's pocket, but none in it the other way around.
There you go. Last thing he did claim, or one of the last
versus 6 figures of mine that I had involved.
He also claimed that he never wanted to be the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, but I wasn't obviously in that locker room, but it would seem otherwise based on some of the things I've heard on your show and whatnot in other places.
He never wanted to be the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. He just wanted our babyface commissioner to have to take the belt, pry the belt from a crippled child's cold
We're going there.
fingers.
We just did that show. Oh,
Fuck
my
that
God.
motherfucker. Fuck him.
Bullet Bob comes back and says, "What the fuck was that?" Oh, I had no idea. He was a young kid that we all had done things for, not the heels publicly, but we recognized him at a few of the shows, and Tim had taken a special liking to him, and that was fine. And we introduced him at a few shows and gotten him some autograph things or merchandise, whatever the case. And once again, the only thing that I knew was that he was there and they were going to have him on television in some form. I had no idea that when Bob came out to take the belt from Tim, his win had been nullified, that Tim would be holding the crippled child and the crippled child would be holding the belt. So Bob literally had to pull his belt away from a crippled child. My head blew up. Bob's head was about to blow up. Horner feigned complete ignorance as to why. Well, why would you be? It was almost like Davey Boy. Why would you be upset? It wasn't me. It was Owen. I wasn't even there. He was a star. He said, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way. What the fuck?"
Oh, we had.
Well, hold on. Another seminal moment of Tim Horner, and
Funny
I've got
you mentioned Horner and Seaman in the same.
Right. Waste of. The worst moment in recorded music history happens very early on when we get about 4 minutes of him warbling his way through a Garth Brooks song. What was the reaction? That was a rib, right? I need to know. Was that a rib?
You know it wasn't.
Here's the thing. Here's another thing. The production company that Mr. Horner had found for us in Knoxville was Big Mama Recording Studio and Tennessee Production Center.
You're kidding.
And no, because Big Mama was their mother. Their mother was the person that had put up the money for them to start this company. It was a guy and his sister and brother-in-law. And Big Mama had put up the money for them to start this thing. It was primarily a recording studio, but they were in Knoxville instead of Nashville. So, but they had bought some video equipment, I assume on the secondary market from the way a lot of it worked. And it opened up a video branch as well. Now, there was a big production company in Knoxville. But we couldn't afford fucking fart in their lobby, right? And you weren't, in the early 90s for television production in Knoxville, you either had the Cadillac or you had a couple of fucking, Opel Cadets. So we picked one of the Opel Cadets because Horner had found them. And so they were obviously, very friendly with Tim. And I don't even know how it came up, but somehow Horner mentioned that he could sing or he did karaoke or he was musical or whatever the fuck. And they said, well, why don't we put him in the recording studio here and shoot it and he can be singing. And at this point, it's one of the early TVs. I'm thinking, okay, one of our baby faces on the roster is going to demonstrate some talent of some description outside this is not a stretch that you would want to do this. That's the kind of thing I like to feature about baby faces, make them likable outside the ring, talented, whatever the fuck. So sure, we'll give you, a couple minutes to do this thing. Well, he picks he loved Garth Brooks, country music, whatever the fuck. I'm not a fan, but once again, I'm in the Smoky Mountains. So I'm sure this is the kind of, for people who like that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing those people will like, right?
Right.
And he's in there and they shoot it. And I mean, I can't sing it. I had to quit singing because of my throat a long time ago. The people threatened to cut it. I can't fucking sing at all. I know that. And I'm no judge. And I'm like, well, I guess he's okay for a wrestler because I was trying to be nice. And I didn't want to, at the time he had no heat with me. This was very early on and the heat would build. So I didn't want to cut his fucking thing. So I put it on there. Fuck. Then I hear, that's one of the first times I heard from Ruben about Horner. So why did you do that? I'm like, well, he's maybe 30 seconds of it. Well, I didn't have a heart to say, well, I could really just tell him we're just going to put 30 seconds of it on. But I always try to sell to, because Horner would question me, why is Tim Horner involved? Because he was so bland and so boring and et cetera. Even Horner was a good hand in the ring. He could work and he had timing, and you could bring a guy like Candido in, put him with Horner, and he'd teach him slow down and work Southern wrestling better. He was good athletically in the ring. He had no fucking promo personality whatsoever, but he looked good in a suit and he was a hometown guy. And the original I thought was he would go out and talk to local groups or find us football teams to sponsor spot shows or, sell some kind of sponsorships and be valuable in the office as well as in the ring. and whether it was merchandise or whether it was a fucking wrestling school, I don't know the one sponsorship, first one yet that he ever sold. It just didn't fucking work. And there I'm trying to justify him to Ruben. And he's like, couldn't you just have 30 seconds of this thing? So it just...
It was not exactly the same quality as the Win a Date with the Rock and Roll Express from Mid-South, I will say that.
And besides, that had to be one of the longer Garth Brooks songs, I would think also, because what I thought was going to be a couple minutes seemed to go about 3 days, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes, Jim. And he's squinting his eyes. His couldn't tell closed. Him that he wasn't a country music star in the making. He was selling it like he was the greatest.
I don't know what we're going to do when we finally get rid of him.
We said that. We said, well, the thing is, Jim,
if it was the same thing that happened when I got rid of him, your merchandise money will immediately go up.
Perfect.
That'll work for us.
soon as I gave Hildebrand the merchandise department, suddenly it was box office business or land office business.
Hey Jim, I wasn't going to ask this, but is there any truth to the rumor that this is on Wikipedia? And I remember reading it a while back. According to Tim Horner, he was considered to replace Dennis Condrey as a member of the Midnight Express. But
I heard this here also. Do you think somebody taught him how to amend Wikipedia? I don't know where the fuck that ever came from. I mean, because was he around and he was blonde at the time? And so somebody said, hey, how about Horner? But Dusty never brought that to us. That was never seriously considered.
I just pulled it up.
Just
because
if he heard somebody say it, for fuck's sake, that don't mean that it was serious.
Yeah, it's on Wikipedia, and it's about the Midnight Express. It says, according to Tim Horner, he was considered to replace Condrey, but Stan Lane just happened to call the office at the right time, and Lane then debuted as Condrey's replacement on April the 4th, 1987, in time to join Eaton in facing the Road Warriors that night in Boston, Massachusetts.
Well, the right time would have been when Jim Crockett Promotions bought Florida Championship Wrestling from Florida. And Stan and Steve, the Fabulous Ones, were working there, but Steve got his real estate license and was retiring, and so Stan was making $300 a week as a single in a almost dead territory. But Dusty was seeing everybody because technically they all worked for Crockett now. So Stan was already working for Crockett in Florida when we pitched Tom Pritchard, who was in Continental at the time. Me and Bobby did.
Okay.
And Dusty said, well, what about Stan Lane? And I did not know that Stan and Steve had split. I was still considering them a tag team. That's why I'd never, wouldn't have thought of that.
Right.
But Stan came up to the office in Charlotte. We sat down, talked about it, boom, and he debuted in Boston 2 days later. So, no, Stan didn't call the office at the right time. Stan was working in Florida, a company they had just fucking bought.
Yeah. You can't believe everything you read on Wikipedia, but that's what he claimed. That's what Horner claimed.
By the way, Mike, you need to retweet our last episode that's out, episode 50, because the picture you put on it, tag Jim, because the picture that you put on it is Horner holding the little kid with the belt.
Oh, Jesus.
And Bob standing there at the mic.
I will consider. Hey, Doc, what else do you have for Jim? Jim, thank you for your time. Hopefully, I know we're running long. I didn't know how much time you had tonight.
Well, I have a feeling in about another 10 minutes, the queen of the castle is going to stick her head around and, hey, dinner.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of the guys here, but one of we go through this week by week, and you see somebody grow and evolve, and just really, for us, you see them at an in-depth level. One of the guys that just stands out week after week is the Dirty White Boy. And that's a guy that, watching Mid-South and World Class growing up in the 80s, we'd heard of, we kind of had seen around but never on a week-by-week basis. What made Dirty White Boy the lead heel in that promotion, and just some thoughts about him?
Well, Tony was perfect for the territory because he was from Knoxville. He had grown up idolizing Ron Wright and watching wrestling, and he knew exactly the kind of wrestling and angles and promos and things that got over in the mountains in East Tennessee, Eastern Kentucky, and that area in that type of territory. And originally, Tony and Tom, and I believe Brian Lee, but I know Tony and Tom were working the Memphis territory when we got started. And I kind of went behind their back. I guess I should have called, but I let it be known to those guys that if they wanted to make approximately $400 a week guaranteed on a regular basis, they could come work for me. And so they did. So I kind of stole them away from Memphis. But I don't know if I think it was lucky that since Tony was there, I wouldn't have been able to bring somebody in from across the country. Especially when we were first getting started, they could still work Memphis part-time because the big towns in Memphis were Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and my stuff was on the weekends, and especially when we weren't running a full schedule and we were just doing TV. So it was an easy transition from one territory to the other, whereas if I'd had to fly somebody in or whatever, it wouldn't have worked. So it was great that Tony was there, but he was, like I said, he was perfect. And I always intended to feature him as, even though we had Paul Orndorff at one time, or we had other, name heels that might come in on occasion for that first year and a half or so. Tony was the guy there locally, and he was always the one standing next. So I've got Tony Anthony teamed up with Paul Orndorff against Brian Lee and Ronnie Garvin, a former NWA world champion. Yeah. So the match is good, and each one of my top guys looks like they belong because everybody's selling for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That did lend credibility to that, and you had those two guys. I guess they, because Paul Orndorff and Garvin obviously are more well known, I guess, on the national scene, and you see those guys there, and you got Dirty White Boy and Primetime Brian Lee there. It makes sense. I mean, yeah, that's some good stuff.
Well, and then with Tony, also eventually I knew, because he was Hacksaw Duggan in Mid-South. He was going to be a great babyface. And I just needed the right kind of thing to do it. And, of course, play on the sympathies that people would have for Mr. Wright, Mr. Ron Wright, if he actually somebody was fucking him around. And here comes this fucking smart-ass Brian Lee and that fucking bitch Tammy. And I did the Aaron Fleming Groucho Marx fucking angle come to true life. Where she was a fucking psychopathic bitch that was taking advantage of Groucho Marx in his declining years, and there was a custody fight with the family and etc. She's fucking him all around. Well, here all of a sudden now, Tony Anthony's Dirty White Boy's mentor and manager and longtime hero, Mr. Ron Wright, this dirty, no good son of a bitch, but he was the greatest wrestler in East Tennessee history. All of a sudden, this Wellesley College cunt graduate and this smart-ass dipwit that follows her around are feeding him some kind of medicine. He's disoriented. He's listening to them. Tony can't find Mr. Right. It was fucking great, and it made sense with everybody that was involved, and in the end, it turns Tony Anthony babyface.
Yeah, it's like with most things in Smoky Mountain. It all made sense and told the story, and you had long-term angles. I was asked recently about that. What made Smoky Mountain so great? It was the long-term angles. It was, you did it the right way. There was no, what do you call it, Jim? Hokey horse shit. There was none of that. It was done the right way.
Gaga or Gaga. But and also with the long-term angles, there had to be, because if you don't establish history that you can draw off of, when you can establish your own history, you're wasting your fucking time. And nothing in wrestling, especially in territory wrestling, drew like history. Bill Watts comes out of retirement in the last Stampede. Dusty Rhodes finally turns on his manager Gary Hart in Florida and begins a blah blah blah, whatever the fuck. History draws. Mm-hmm. So set up your own history. Bob Armstrong wondered why I didn't want him to wrestle, because he was still wrestling everywhere else. I said, no, you will not wrestle in this company, but I want you at every TV and all the big shows. But you're the commissioner, and you will be my Cowboy Bill Watts coming out of retirement. I would have loved to have been able to wait 3 or 4 years, but I knew we had to wait at least a year, or elsewise it was bullshit. So we waited about a year and a half. And with Ron Wright, you knew he was going to get out of the chair. Everybody knew he was going to get out of the chair. That's why he couldn't get out of the chair. And he wasn't going to get out of the chair, I said, for at least a year. But about 14 months in, Tracy Smothers is the one he has to get out of the fucking chair for. And that gave the people enough time that they thought, oh, he's going to get out of the chair. He's going to get out of the chair. Well, I guess he ain't getting out of that fucking chair. That's when he gets out of the fucking chair.
Right.
Just do it for fucking 6 weeks or whatever, who gives a shit?
Was the idea to put him in Tony Anthony in the Yankees gear? Was that you, or was that kind of a collaboration with Ron Wright too?
Actually, that was me. I'll take that one. But that's the thing. It just started as a line. I said, yeah, say, you guys are so ashamed because the Southern boy, Tracy Smothers, but they're both as fucking country as a goddamn mud fence, Tony and Ron, right? They're even country than Tracy. So I said, this would be perfect. Just announce it because the people are supporting this fucking guy. You guys have decided to move to New York City and you bought property there. And then they came out wearing the fucking shit and got all the stuff and everything. And it just fed on itself. That's what you did. Come up with shit.
Yeah, Ron Wright went on to say that he had to go up north to see some real doctors and not some hillbilly doctors, and they were able to diagnose him and really help him out much better than the hillbilly doctors in the Smoky Mountains. It was really brilliant. I mean, we haven't gotten there yet in the promotion, but it's coming. And Ron Wright pops us every single week. It seems it's just what he does. That's how great he was and on the mic. I wish he was alive. I'd love to talk to him about this promotion and just his time in Smoky Mountain and beyond that, because he was so good. But that was done really well.
He probably had more stories than anybody in the wrestling. Listen to the Tennessee Studcast. Ron Fuller will tell you some Ron Wright stories, but he was the epitome of professional wrestling.
I just heard.
No, he really was, because, and even though he wrestled in the boys club and amateur wrestled back when that in East Tennessee, that meant probably stretching each other and, at the boys club. But he was the epitome of pro wrestling, because he knew exactly how to get the rise out of people as a babyface or as a heel, the things to say, that motor mouth, just the way he carried himself and the way he did things. He could either, and at the same time, he was the hottest heel in the entire geographic area for 20 years and was shot at and stabbed and everything. He still worked a regular job and associated with people on the street. They knew who he was, but he could turn it on when he was doing his thing.
Well, I was listening to the most recent Jim Cornette experience where Ron Fuller talked about that somebody pulled the gun out and was shooting, and Ron was saying, "Man, there's a guy over there, he's shooting," and the cop said, "Nah, that guy's a dead shot. If he really wanted to shoot you, you'd already be dead."
Yeah.
The stories from the old days, those are great. That's the type of stuff that just lives on forever. So, Jim, thank you so much for your time. We kept you a long time, and I'm
don't worry about it. Hey,
grateful.
guys, I like and plus you get you crank some of these stories out of me that even Brian doesn't get. On the Jim Cornette Experience, my co-host, the great Brian Last, he doesn't even get some of this stuff. So we got to do this again soon. I will make up for milking you and making you wait by coming back with a rematch quicker. And then, of course, come back too quick with the rematch, you probably won't fucking draw.
Yeah, well, Jim and I actually...
hopefully it'll give everybody a better understanding of that I wasn't just fucking slapping this shit together as I went, and there was actually some coherent thought behind it, whether it looked like it or not.
Yeah, you can see it in as it plays out. We love it, and that's why we do it each and every week, and we dedicate so much time to it. But thank you, Jim. I know Doc, you got any parting words for Jim before we let him go?
Well, I just wanted to tell you something. One of the things we do at the end of each episode is we give the episode a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, and we call it handing out disability checks, because we like to play heel a little bit ourselves. And then we also give out the Government Cheese Award for the guy or the angle that was the hottest angle of the episode. So I just want you to know that in episode 55, which we're going to record in the morning, you're winning the Government Cheese. So congratulations.
What did I do?
You appeared... You went on WCW Saturday night and you had a stare down with the man Bill Watts himself, and you're going to win some Government Cheese.
That's okay. I remember that now. Yes, obviously that was that time of. We have reached that time of year. Excellent.
Yeah, we
and that would have been a completely interesting thing too, because that would have led to, if Watts had stayed, WCW talent in Smoky Mountain talent on TBS television. And an early form of a developmental program up there in the hills.
Wow, that's good to know. We didn't know that. We'll definitely have to talk more about that next time you come on.
Instead, everybody fucking grumped at Bill Watts and drove him fucking nuts, and he went home.
Oh boy, the Cowboy Watts, man. Well, Jim, thank you again. We love doing Smoky Mountain Wrestling recaps. We do it. We record two every other Friday. So tomorrow is actually our day to record 2 new episodes, and they generally air about a month out. So, but thank you. Well, for actually, everything.
I can't wait to get my Government cheese.
There you go.
All right,
have a blast.
I'll talk to you soon. We'll set up the rematch.
Sounds good, Jim. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.